What's going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, Magnus Carlsen plays an unthinkable opening against Daniel Naroditsky in their chess.com blitz match. Now, all kidding aside, this has to be one of Magnus Carlsen's top 10 weirdest openings of all time. Now, in the game, Magnus Carlsen is playing as white. He opens 1e4, and Daniel Naroditsky goes for the very sharp Sicilian defense with 1c5. Now, from here, Magnus knight f3, d6, and Magnus, instead of going for the open Sicilian, he heads for the Moscow variation with the move bishop to b5. Now from here, black has two main options, bishop d7 and knight d7. Now knight d7 is the sharper move. That is what Daniel Naroditsky goes for in this game, knight to d7. And here on move 4, this is where Magnus Carlsen plays his surprise. And he plays the move g4. Oh my goodness, Magnus, what the heck is this? Magnus, why would you play g4 in this position? The madman. Magnus, what are you doing? Okay, real fast. Instead of g4, white's standard idea in this position is to go short castles. Black usually goes a6, white retreats to d3, and from there, white's gonna do something like c3, bishop c2, perhaps d4, rook e1, kind of standard Italian and Roy Lopez style development. But instead of all this, we have the move g4 on the board on move 4. Now, this is a very common attacking idea in the open Sicilian where white goes d4, then recaptures with the knight after c takes d4. However, here, the g-pawn is attacking literally nothing in the black position, and the only reason Magnus is not hanging a pawn right now is that knight on the d7 square is blocking the bishop's access to g4. Now, okay, before I get roasted in the comment section, no, this is technically not a new opening. There is this grandmaster with the last name Jacobian who played it 7 different times in 2022 and 2023, and he even played it in one game against the super grandmaster Alireza Firouzja. Although he lost the game, it's clear this is a somewhat viable idea. Okay, let's see how Magnus Carlsen follows up in the game. Now from here, Daniel Naroditsky kicks the bishop back with the move a6, and Magnus Carlsen doesn't retreat to d3 as is typical in this line. Instead, he goes bishop e2. Now, this is actually the right square for the bishop. Here in this line, Magnus Carlsen is going to want to go d4, breaking in the center, trying to transpose to some sort of open Sicilian. And if Magnus Carlsen pulls that off, this move g4 is actually going to be somewhat useful in the position instead of being a complete liability. So e2, definitely the right square for the bishop. Now Daniel counterattacks on the queen side, b5, gaining space and preparing the idea of bishop b7. And now Magnus showing his idea, d4, breaking in the center, and we have some sort of weird open Sicilian style position. Okay, let's see how both sides develop from here. Daniel, bishop b7, getting the bishop open on the long diagonal and pressuring e4. Solid idea. Magnus, knight c3 defending. Okay, now Daniel Naroditsky, he has a big choice to make. How is he going to develop his kingside pieces? Now, the big decision he has is how is he going to get his dark squared bishop on f8 into the game? And there are 3 main ways to do it in these Najdorf style positions. The first way is with e6. You can also do e5. And finally, there is that dragon style move with g6. So overall, that bishop is heading to e7 or g6, and there are 3 ways to prep that. Now in the game, Daniel plays the strongest move in this position. That is simply e6. Now real fast, the other 2 moves have massive drawbacks in this position. For example, if black were to go e5 here, that is a huge mistake because here Magnus would have the f5 square for his knight, knight to f5, and that bishop is unable to challenge that knight on f5. Oh boy, that would be a complete disaster for black. Now g6 also has its problems. If black went g6 in this position, then Magnus has the crazy idea of launching a kingside attack with the move h4, and suddenly Magnus Carlsen's development with the idea of bishop to e2 and g2 to g4 finally makes some sense. I mean, here there are a lot of lines. One of the best lines for black is to go h6, then Magnus would go h5, then we have g5 trying to block the kingside. But but then Magnus could block the queenside somehow, sort of, with the move b4. I mean, it's all ultra complicated, but the point being Magnus is doing relatively okay here. Okay, instead of all that, e6 on the board. This is the best move. This is technically called a Scheveningen style move. Of course, we're transposing to some sort of Scheveningen structure. That's where you have the Sicilian pawns on the d6 and the e6 squares. Now, Magnus, a3, blocking the idea of b4. Of course, after black went e6, the idea of going knight d5 is no longer available, so black was threatening the move b4, kicking that knight off the c3 square, which was defending e4. So if white did nothing, let's say bishop e3, then b4 would remove that knight on c3 from the defense of e4, and after something like knight a4, bishop takes e4, black is simply up a pawn. So overall, a3, excellent move from Magnus Carlsen in this position. Now, knight f6, attacking e4 again. Magnus goes f3, and now h6 from black, stopping g5. And suddenly, we have some sort of English attack style position from the Najdorf Sicilian. It's almost a direct transposition. And after this move, bishop e3 from Magnus, we're already seeing Magnus Carlsen's new idea in this position. I don't mean new as in it's a new, completely new idea. I mean, this is the evolving strategy he's using in this game. Okay, strategy is basically queen d2, long castles, and launching a English attack style attack on the king side. Now, this is literally almost an exact position you would get in the English attack of the Najdorf Sicilian. Here, I'm going to real fast jump to the actual position. It is this position right here. Now, the only difference here between these two positions is the fact that white has bishop e2 on the board instead of queen d2. Now, real fast, jumping back to the position in the game. Once again, bang, white has bishop e2 on the board instead of queen d2, and also it is black to move here instead of white. And of course, that one wasted tempo came from the fact that white went bishop b5, black went a6, and white had to retreat the bishop back to e2. So overall, almost an exact English attack position, but black is up one tempo, and white has the sort of wasted tempo bishop b2. He would much rather have queen d2 in this position. So overall, that is enough to give black a very solid edge here, but white is not necessarily out of the game either. Okay, here black, he finds the best move in the position. Well job, Daniel Naroditsky. He breaks in the center with the move d5. Now, it may look a little bit strange if you're a beginner. I mean, neither side is castled, especially black, and now black is trying to blow open the game. Well, it turns out he's not necessarily trying to blow open the position. If white takes on d5, as Magnus did in the game, then black's going to be able to recapture on d5 with a piece and simply be able to have excellent control over the center. Now, real fast, e takes d5 was Magnus Carlsen's choice in the game. There were some other options Magnus could have done. I mean, there are a lot of sharp lines in these English attack style positions. Ideas like f4 or even g5 immediately are fair game, but e takes d5 is the best move here. Now, up until this point, Daniel Naroditsky, he has played this game literally perfectly. I mean, this guy is a monster in blitz, and he is just playing this Najdorf position flawlessly, and here is where he makes his first minor mistake. Okay, in the game, he takes knight takes d5. Now, this move looks perfectly logical. I mean, typically you want to preserve your bishops in this position. The better move is actually bishop takes d5, and at first glance, this does not look correct. There's a reason Daniel didn't play it in this blitz game. I mean, typically you do not want white to be able to take your light squared bishop like that here. However, in this position, if Magnus would have taken on d5, and if Daniel would have taken back with the knight, the critical idea in this position is black does not want white to be able to complete development with the bishop on e3, the queen on d2, and long castles. And the key to stopping that is to disrupt that bishop on the e3 square. And for that reason, you actually need a knight on d5. Now from here, white's basically going to have to waste a tempo with an idea like bishop f2, and that is just not good. You really need that bishop on e3 in these types of positions. So in this position, Daniel Naroditsky would have a massive advantage as black. But going back to the game, with knight takes d5, here is the difference. Here, Magnus Carlsen, he takes on d5. Daniel takes back with the bishop, which is is typically the right way to go, but now Magnus simply queen d2, intending long castles on the next move. And shockingly, white is able to complete development. Black is not able to disrupt that bishop on e3, and suddenly white is in the game. I mean, look at black's king, still stuck in the middle of the board. Black's going to have to do something about it, and it's not immediately obvious how black's going to attack white here. So, what is Daniel going to do to put a stop to Magnus Carlsen and his new momentum in this game? He starts rook c8. Now again, if you're a beginner, this may look counterintuitive. Black is developing his queen side before getting his king to safety. Typically, as a beginner, you want to get your king castled pretty much as soon as possible. Well, in the Najdorf, things are often a little bit wonky-wacky. Wonky-wacky, is that even a word? Wonky-wacky. In the Najdorf, things are wonky-wacky. Seriously though, in the Najdorf, it is very often the best idea to get the rook to the open c-file on c8 before trying to get your king to safety. It's just one of those weird rules of the Najdorf. You often need to get counterplay going against the white king as fast as possible. Now from here, Magnus castles queenside, just continuing developing, and suddenly Magnus is ready to blow open the kingside and launch his attack. So Daniel needs to strike right away. Okay, in the game, Daniel has a wide variety of ways to get his development going. He can go bishop e7, bishop d6, bishop c5. These are all viable. And even queen c7, ignoring development of his kingside for one more move, is actually a playable idea. Now, in the game, bishop c5, again, all of these moves are roughly equal, roughly just as good as each other. And here, Magnus Carlsen, I told you this guy was ready to strike. He is like a coiled spring, and he finally explodes. He goes with the move knight to f5. Now, real fast, now this is technically not a knight sacrifice, as white is going to regain the material very, very quickly. However, the whole idea is super dangerous for both sides. Now, first of all, Magnus is threatening knight takes g7, so Daniel is going to have to do something about the knight, and the best way to deal with it is to get rid of it right away, is if that knight stays on f5, it is going to be an absolute monster the rest of the game. I mean, you can just imagine Daniel castling here to the king side, but then white's going to have all kinds of threats on h6, knight takes h6, bishop takes h6. I mean, that is going to be too much. And yes, technically the computer says this is the best move in the position, so technically black is defending for now on those sacrifices, but man, that is dangerous. Okay, in the game, Daniel played the more human-looking move, e takes f5. I mean, you would have to be Hans Niemann to castle in this position. And that was a joke. Hans Niemann, I love you. You're still my favorite player. Everyone, that was a joke. But back to the game, Daniel plays the human-looking move, e takes f5 here. And at first glance, it looks like white may be able to just take that bishop on d5. However, that would be a massive blunder. After queen takes d5, you remove the defender of the e3 bishop. Bishop takes e3 check. And from here, it is simply game over. Black is up an entire piece. Black has 2 minor pieces versus white's 1. So you definitely cannot do that here. So instead, how do you get the piece back? I mean, Magnus can get the piece back, right? Well, here's how it's done. First, Magnus takes the bishop on c5. Bishop takes c5. Now, the only way to defend that bishop on d5 is to take with the rook. Rook takes c5. Of course, knight takes c5. Magnus will capture back with the queen. And here, Magnus would actually have a better position, believe it or not. Starting from that weird opening 4g4, he comes back. But instead of that, rook takes c5 on the board. Now, the bishop is still defended. However, Magnus does have a trick up his sleeve to remove the defender of the bishop, and that is with the move b4. Bang! Suddenly, the rook doesn't have any squares along the 5th rank to defend the bishop. It's got to move somewhere. Or does it? Okay, in the game, Daniel Naroditsky, he doesn't defend the rook, he goes queen f6. This is insane. Okay, real fast, queen f6 was not the best move here. Technically, the best move in this position was the insane-looking move, rook to c6. Now, from here, the tactics and the computer lines are just freaking bonkers. I mean, the best line here starts bishop takes b5, sacking the bishop. The idea is you want to open up that e-file for the rook. Rook he1 coming as soon as possible. Here, black actually doesn't take back a takes b5. He goes rook d6, defending the bishop on d5. Then white gives the check. Black's got to go king f8. The whole line is just completely nuts. I mean, technically black's up material, but white has the attack, but it didn't happen in the game. I don't want to go into too much detail here. Now, instead of that, queen f6 on the board from Daniel. Of course, queen f6 in this position. He refuses to defend that rook on c5. Now, from here, the computer is giving Magnus the edge in the position, but the whole thing is just completely insane. Magnus checks the king. Daniel goes king d8. Then finally, Magnus takes the rook. But here, Daniel Naroditsky showing why he is such a monster in blitz. He finds an incredible solution, bringing his rook into the game, hitting the queen. Here, Magnus goes queen d3, and then Daniel, he finds a way to force a perpetual against Magnus Carlsen. And on move 25, both sides agree to a draw. Wow, what a game by Magnus Carlsen. Of course, starting with the insane move g4 on move 4. What a crazy idea. Now, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and check out my Magnus Carlsen playlist, which is showing up on your screen right now. And I will see you in the next video.